You know how long it took
Good
me to
evening.
get,
Hope
how
you're all
long it
doing
took me
well.
to
We're
get
ready to
diet
get started. Today we are learning Maseches Yevamos daf Pei Zayin. Mirza Hashem finishing the parak of Yesh Mosaros and starting the parak of Isha Rabbah. So today we're only learning one blot, even though it's Thursday. Shabbos, we'll be learning one blot, and then we'll be behind a blot, and then midnight on Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos for Shavuos, we'll catch up. Okay, we are at a new Mishnah on the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Beis. And this Mishnah has multiple layers to it. The first half of the Mishnah speaks about a Bas Yisrael who first marries a Kohen and then he dies, and then she marries a Levi and then he dies, and then she marries a Yisrael and then he dies. And she has a child with each of them. And then our focal point is going to be what is her access to foods that are typically restrictive, such as Meiser and Truma. So that's the first part of the Mishnah. And the second part of the Mishnah is a flip where the wife is not a Bas Yisrael, but rather a Bas Kohen. And the structure is still similar for that. So let's get started. 5-6 lines from the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Beis at a new Mishnah. The Mishnah writes, Bas Yisrael shenises lekohen tochal b'truma, a basic din. A regular Yisraelis girl, and she marries a Kohen, the halacha is that she's allowed to eat truma. She earned the right through marriage. Now, mace, if her Kohen husband dies, but v'lohe menu ben, so let's say she's married to Mr. Rabbi Kohen, and they have a child, baby Kohen. So then, if there's still a child, even though the husband's dead, but because the child is still alive, tochal b'truma, the din is that she's still allowed to eat truma vicariously through her son. Now, her Kohen husband died, and then she's back on the market, and she remarries. Nises le-Levi, and then she marries a Levi. Now she earns the right, even though she's a Yisraelis, tochal b'maiser, she's no longer allowed to eat truma because she's been trumped by. Doesn't matter. Now she's restricted by her husband. We'll get there. And the halacha is that tochal b'maiser, she's allowed to eat maiser. What about mace? What if the Levi husband dies? And in that marriage, in the second marriage with the Levi, they had a child as well. Mace v'lohe menu ben. So if the Levi husband dies, but before he died, they had a child. So then tochal b'maiser, the halacha is that this woman, now married to her second husband, when the second husband died, the halacha is she can still eat the maiser. Then she marries a third time. Nises Yisrael. By the way, we're running into a halachic issue. All of her husbands are dying. So that's a little bit of a problem. But in the meantime, the Mishnah is not really talking about that. So let's just assume that it's a theoretical case for now. Nises Yisrael, 4 lines from the bottom on Pei Vav Amud Beis. Now she marries for her third husband, a Yisrael. Now that she's married to Yisrael, she's a Yisrael. She's married to a Yisrael. Lo socha lo b'truma v'lo b'maiser. Now she can't eat any restricted foods because she's a Yisrael and her husband's a Yisrael. Granted, she has a Kohen child and she has a Levi child. Doesn't matter because her husband is a Yisrael and she's a Yisrael. No portal of entry to Truma and Maiser. Let's say the third husband dies, Mace, Billah Hemenu Ben, and now she has a Yisrael child. That Yisrael child limits her from eating everything as well. Lo socha, lo b'truma, v'lo b'maiser. Now, the 3 husbands have died. Now the Gemara says, what happens if the Yisrael child dies? The Yisrael child was holding her back from Truma and Meiser. So says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom. Let's just summarize what we have right now. This woman, let's say her name is Rachel. She has 3 children. One is the child of a Kohen, one is a Levi, and one is a child of a Yisrael. Okay. Mace benami Yisrael. If her third child, the one from the third marriage, the Yisrael dies, the child, tochal b'maiser, then what's her default? Then her next child, her previous child was a Levi, and therefore she can eat Meiser again. Mace benami Levi, if the child of the Levi dies, then who is her only descendant at this point is a Kohen. Then tochal b'truma. Mace benami Kohen. Let's say that her child from the Kohen dies. Now she has no husbands and no children. Now she's just a Bas Yisrael. The halacha is lo socha lo b'truma v'lo b'maiser. She reverts back to a regular Bas Yisrael. That is case number 1 in our Mishnah. On daf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph on the top, at the second half of the Mishnah, we have a very similar case. It's slightly inverted because the wife is not a Yisrael. The Mishnah writes on the top of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, what if the case is a Bas Kohen shenises Yisrael? This is a Bas Kohen. Before she gets married, she has rights to Truma, and then she marries a Yisrael lo sochal b'truma. She loses her rights. She married out. She married a Yisrael, and therefore she cannot eat Truma. Now, let's say that her husband, the Yisrael, dies. She's a Bas Kohen, and her husband dies, but v'lohe menu ben. And they had a child in this first marriage, lo sochal b'truma. The din is that because of this child who's Yisrael, she's tethered to the Yisrael, and even though she's a Bas Kohen, the din is that she cannot eat Truma. And let's say for her second marriage, Nises le-Levi, when she's married to a Levi, tochal b'maiser, she's a Bas Kohen married to a Levi, she's allowed to eat maiser because her husband is now a Levi. What happens if this husband dies? Mace v'lohe menu ben. But in this second marriage of the Bas Kohen to the Levi, they have a son, tochal b'maiser, because she's tethered through this Levi child to Meiser. She's allowed to eat the Meiser, no problem. Then she marries a third time. Nises lekohen, a bas kohen marries a kohen. Halacha is tochal b'truma. Now she's allowed to eat truma because she's married to a kohen. Meis v'lohimenu ben. Let's say that the third husband, the kohen, dies, but they still have a child together before he dies. So tochal b'truma, the din is that through her child, who's a kohen, the child of a kohen, she's still allowed to eat the truma. That means all three husbands have now died. This bas kohen married Yisrael, Levi, and kohen, and then all three husbands die. Fine. Nebuch, the third child that was born for her, the Kohen child, Meis ben Nomi Kohen, so then she loses her rights to Truma, Lo Sochal B'Truma, because what's her next son who's alive? A Levi. Meis ben Nomi Levi. If the next child who's a Levi dies, then Lo Sochal B'Meiser, then she's restricted from Meiser. Meis ben Nomi Yisrael, and if her third child dies, really her oldest of the three, because the Bas Kohen first married a Yisrael, the din is Choseres LeBeis Aviha. Then this Bas Kohen can go back home and she's now eligible for Truma, that she's allowed to go back to her father's house as she did in her youth to eat bread from her father, she may eat. A little bit of an intense Mishnah, but what? It's a confusing Mishnah. It takes a few times to comb through. But the brief summary, just to go through it, is that first she's a Yisrael, the case number one. She marries a Kohen, he dies. She marries a Levi, he dies. She marries a Yisrael. So we can already look, when she's married to a Kohen, she can have Meiser. When she's married to Levi, she can have, when she's married to a Kohen, she can have Truma. When she's married to Levi, she can have Meiser. When she's married to Israel, she can have nothing. But then the kids are the second layer of the Mishnah. Right, exactly.
Which is still my brega.
You still have access.
Well, unless they're all dead.
Then she's back, but that's only true by the Bas Yisrael. In the second part of the Mishnah, when she's a Bas Kohen, her reverting back when everybody dies, the three husbands and the three kids, is she's still a Bas Kohen. She goes back to her father's house. She gets Truma. We're going to extensively discuss what she has access to with the Chaz of Ashok, but because that we discussed already. Yes.
I'm curious as to why nobody bothered to address how this woman managed to kill off three husbands, bam, 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 like that, and not mention it, not say what's going on there. I mean, to me, that rises to a higher level than Teruma and Meiser.
100%. She's called a kadlanis in halacha. This woman who kills three husbands is a kadlanis. But that
if they were killed in a car accident.
No.
That could be the situation.
It could be the situation. If she'd be a kadlanis, and first of all, you have to kill three. It's machlokas in the Tanaim. Do you have to kill three to become the kadlanis, or do you have to kill two to become a kadlanis? How do we establish a chazaka? How do we establish that which is halachically assumed to be the habit? Is it in two creations or in three creations? So if we hold three, you have Hirsch's answer, which is maybe they died, with freak accidents, and then the question falls away because that's not her. It could be that she's a katlanis, that she is killing off her husbands, whatever that means, but it takes three to become a katlanis. That's another possibility. And the third answer is that you're right, but our Mishnah is just not talking about that. Our Mishnah is in a vacuum right now. The Mishnah completely ignored it. Completely correct. And again, there's a host of reasons as to why. Just crowdsourcing. We have a couple of good answers, but okay. So the Mishnah picks on the in the first half of the Mishnah picks on the Gemara picks on one line where we said Meis benami Levi tochal b'truma, that if the son died, the son that was a Levi died, she can fall back to eat the truma from her son who's still alive, who's a Kohen. Says the Gemara, Dahadra achla mishum bina. She can go back and eat based on her son, and her only living son at that point in the first half of the Mishnah was her Kohen son. Minalan. Where do we know this din from, that she's allowed to go back and default based on her child? Says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down, not really, but 12 lines down, Amarav Reb Abba, Amarav, Bas Uvas. The pasuk reads, Uvas Kohen Kisi Almanu Grusha V'Zera In La V'Chule. And it says Uvas, and there's an extra vav. So it could have said Bas, instead it said Uvas. And therefore we know that a woman can default back to her child status, and when her only child is a Kohen, she's allowed to eat truma. Says the Gemara, Kiman, this doesn't work according to everyone. The drasha of Bas Uvas only works according to Rabbi Akiva, the Darish Vavi, because really Rabbi Akiva was the only one who darshans the letter Vav. What that means is, from looking at like biblical exegesis, when we see the letter Vav, it's only valuable according to Rabbi Akiva. You can't, what? Exegesis, biblical exegesis, when you take something in the Torah and extract from it. Drasha. By the way, the Bible classes that I took in YU was this, the biblical exegesis. What was Rabbi Akiva's methodology? We had one class that was all on the methodology of each of the classical Rishonim on Tanakh. Rashi's derech and pshat was X. The Ibn Ezra, the derech and what you can expect from him, and he brought raya bruras from across. It was fascinating. It was fast. So that's where that word came from. So fine, sorry. The drasha of the letter Vav is only allowed according to Rabbi Akiva. Where's Mark? Says the Gemara, no, it's really not only Rabbi Akiva. Afilu tema Rabbanan, we can even learn out this idea that her remaining son can determine what she's allowed to eat. Even the Rabbanan would say that because it's not darshaning the Vav. Really, it's kula uvas kra yiseri. The whole word uvas is a kra yiseri, extra words, and therefore even the Rabbanan might agree that the word uvas teaches us that if her only remaining child is a Kohen, she is then allowed to eat the truma. The Gemara says a brisa, Tanu Rabbanan, Shehi Choseres, in the last case of the Mishnah, when this Bas Kohen, everybody dies and she goes back to her father's house. The Gemara says when she does go back, Choseres l'truma, yes, she's allowed to eat the truma. However, the Eina Choseres l'chaz of Ashok. She's not allowed to eat something that her father is allowed to eat, which is the chaz of Ashok, which is parts of the shlam and part of a korban that a Kohen is allowed to eat. She's not allowed. Gemara is now going to present 6 different reasons as to why this is true. Answer number 1, third of the way down. Amar Rav Chizda Amar Ravina Bar Shila Maikra He B'Trumas HaKachim Lo Sochel B'Mura Min HaKachim Lo Sochel. She's not allowed to eat that which was separated from the kachim, which is the chaz of Ashok. That's answer number 1. Answer number 2 is from Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Bar Avua. The pasuk says Milechem Below Kol Lechem Prat L'chaz of Ashok. The word Milechem is she can eat from the bread. Diuk, what can't she eat? Chazev Ashok. Therefore, she's excluded from there. Maskiv Larami Barchama. That's not correct. Maybe the word milechem was more of a broad food word and didn't mean literally bread. It just meant food in general. And what was it coming to exclude? It's coming to say prat lehafaras nadarim, that the father is no longer able to nullify his daughter's promises, his daughter's nadarim. We know that the pasuk in Chumash writes that a daughter who makes a promise while she's still single, her father can nullify the promise. But what about now? She's been married, she's had a few kids, and now she's back in the house. So says the Gemara, maybe when it says milechem, it doesn't mean to exclude chaz v'shok. It means to say that in this strange scenario where the daughter moves back home after having built 3 families and lost everybody, the father, it's not the same daughter. It's not the same daughter. She's not allowed to have her promises nullified by the father. Omar Rava, that can't be what's happening here. That can't be what milechem means, because kfar paska tana debei Rabbi Shmuel. We already paskined on this case of whether or not a father is allowed to nullify his daughter's nedarim. What does the brisa say? The tana debei Rabbi Shmuel, the neder almana grusha yakum aleha. If she's an almana or a grusha, she's a widow or she's divorced, her nedarim are on her, yakum aleha. They're for her to determine as to whether or not she keeps or nullifies. Ma talmud lomar. What does that come to teach us? Hello. After all, isn't it obvious that motzi michlal avu, motzi michlal baal? She left her house already, and all of her husbands have died. Ella says the Gemara. It must be that what's going on over here, and why the pasuk needed to go out of its way to say that almanu grusha yakum aleh, that she's responsible for her own nedarim, is because hareisha masar ha'av l'shluchei habal, because the father gave over the rights to his daughter to the shluchim of the Baal, or Oshamasur Shluchei Ha'av L'Shlucho Habal V'Nisarmelo Niskar Shabaderech. That's when she died in Ukimta. She died in a unique scenario. And Heachani Kore Beis Avia Shalzu, O Beis Baila Shalzu. There's no way in that scenario to say who she belongs to. If she dies during the shlichus process, we don't know who she belongs to. Ella, says the Gemara. So Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, this brisa teaches us we already know that a father is not allowed to be mefer neder for his daughter once she's left the house, even for an hour. Once she's left Birshus Baila, she went to her husband's, even for a moment, even if she then comes back, the father has lost his rights to be mefer neder, to nullify promises for the daughter. So therefore, says the Gemara, the answer of Rav Nachman in the name of Rabba Bar Avua cannot be that the word milechem is coming to exclude hafaras nedar. So therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. Let's go to answer number 3, 2/3 of the way down, 3 lines before the wide lines. Amar of Safra says, "Milechem avia tochel." She can eat from the bread of her father, lechem v'lo basar, only bread but not flesh. Therefore, she cannot eat chazav v'shok. Rav Papa Amar milechem avia tochel, same words. And what is the drash here? Lechem akanu avia. The only thing she's allowed to eat is that which her father actually has a kinyan on. Prat lechazav v'shok b'shulchan gvor kazachu. However, the chazav v'shok that comes from a korban, that comes from kachim, and therefore, yes, the father can eat it, but he doesn't really own it. And because the father doesn't own the chazav v'shok, he can't really give it to his daughter unless She was still living in the house initially, but because she went out of the house, she's done. Answer number 5, first of the long lines of Rava Amar, the pasuk says, "Ve'es chazeh tenufa v'shoka truma tochlu, ata uvanecha uvnosecha itach." And what's the drasha? Bisman sheitach, only when she lives with you as a child, but once she grows up, conversational. Then the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi bar Ava Tana, we have a brisa that says as follows: Kshehi chozeres lebeis avia, chozeres truma v'enu chozeres lechazav b'shok. That when a woman does come back to her house, like we said above, she's eligible for truma, but not for eating the parts of the shlam and the chazav b'shok. And then the Gemara says a line that is a contrasting line. We need to understand it. It says bishvil b'na, but if she has a child who is of the Kohen family, then chozeres af lechazav b'shok. So this line of Rabbi bar Ava was presented by Rav Mordechai. Also, Rav Mordechai Amar l'shmaisa kamet to Rav Ashi. This strange distinction. If a woman comes home with no children, she can eat truma but not chazav b'shok. If the woman comes home with a child who's from a Kohen, she can even eat the chazav b'shok. So it says Rav Ashi, Amar, where did you learn this from? That a woman is allowed to be chozeres, but she cannot eat chazav b'shok. And where did you learn that if she has a child, she's allowed to eat even chazav b'shok? The pasuk says, "Mi ubas," from the pasuk that we started with at the Gemara at the top of this page. So it says the Gemara, "Mi adifa lamina." How can it be that the child is more powerful than the woman herself? When the Bas Yisrael comes home with a child in tow, this Kohen child, the halacha is she has a full restoration. She can eat the truma, she can eat the chazav b'shok. But when she comes back by herself, she can only eat the truma, but not the chazav b'shok. Why is the kid more powerful? So the Gemara responds 5 lines into the white lines, because Hassan, by the woman, ksivi mi'ute. We have something in the pasuk that teaches us something exclusionary about a woman. The pasuk says milechem, which implies she's eating something, but not everything. So therefore, by her, we say, when it's only the woman without a child, then the Gemara has the din that she can eat the truma when she goes back home to Beis Avia, but she cannot eat the chazav b'shok. However, Masha'en Kain, when it comes to the child, when she does bring this Kohen child with her back to her father's house, hacha, by the child, lo ksivi mi'ute, by the child, there are no exclusions, and therefore there's no reason to limit this Kohen as she returns home, this Bas Yisrael, who has a child when she returns home with the child, and therefore she can even eat the chazav b'shok. We're at the 2 dots, about 12 lines from the bottom of the page. The Gemara is going to go through some very, very sophisticated and detailed kal v'chomers, 5 of them over from where we are until the end of the parak. So buckle up; they're hard. We're going to be making comparisons from the world of yibum over to the world of truma, and they are somewhat subtle. But let's dig in. First, the first part is the easy part, which is the brisa. Tanu Rabbanan. Let me read it within the 2 dots. Bas Kohen shenises leYisrael. The second half of the Mishnah speaks about a Bas Kohen who marries Yisrael v'chulei. Tanu Rabbanan. We said v'shavel beis avia prat l'shomeres yavam. Yes, when she goes home, she can eat truma. However, if she's a shomeres yavam, if Rachel was married to Ruvain and Ruvain died, and then Shimon is her shomeres yavam, shomer yavam, so then she's not allowed to eat truma. And also kine ureha prat lemu beres. That when we say that a person has to go back, that a woman can go back to her house, kine ureha, great if she's like she was when she was a child. However, if she's pregnant, then she's not allowed to eat truma. Says the Gemara, why did you have to teach me the din of kine ureha prat lemu beres, to exclude a woman who's pregnant? I already know that from the following kal v'chomer, v'halo dinu. What is the din? What is the kal v'chomer? Says the Gemara, we know as follows. Uma b'makom shelo asa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni lepotra min hayibum. What does this mean? Let's say that Rachel was first married to Chaim. Chaim is of the Stein family, not related to the Klein family. So Chaim over there, she's married and they have a child, and then they get divorced or the husband dies. Fine. Now she wants to remarry Ruvain of the Klein family, and then they don't have a child, but Ruvain dies. Now she has a child with Chaim, but she doesn't have a child with Ruvain. Is there still yibum to Shimon? Now, typically we would say yes. So therefore, the Gemara says as follows: just like in a case where when she had a child of Vlad min Harishon, we don't say that the Vlad min Harishon impacts the Vlad min Hasheni, the potra min Yibum, and there asa ubar kiyilod, and there even if she was pregnant, we would assume that the child, it's as if he's born, and therefore she'd still be chayev in Yibum. Then makom she'asa Vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni leposla min truma. Yet in our Mishnah, we know that the birth of the child in her first marriage impacts whether or not she has access to truma in her second marriage. So then, eino din shenasa ubar kilod. Of course, we're going to have a limitation from a woman who's pregnant. Therefore, says the Gemara, maybe we don't need to have kinureha prat lemeuberes. Maybe the Bryce has an extra drasha because of the kal v'chomer that we just learned. Says the Gemara, that's not correct. Lo, your kal v'chomer is flawed because mali asa ubar ki lo le'inyin yibum share asa mesim kechayim. That when it comes to a woman who's pregnant and we treat that child in utero like the child is born in regards to yibum, share asa mesim kechayim, that we treat mesim kechayim, that if a child dies, she'd be chayebes beyibum. V'nasa ubar ki yilod le'inyan truma shelo asa mesim kechayim. So there's a big difference between those two in regards to ubar status, and therefore by truma, Talmud lomar kinu urea prat lemeuberes. We needed the drasha. The Gemara asks, why did we need both the pasuk of Kinu Ureha, which teaches us V'isrich lemichtav me'uberes, V'isrich lemichtav zera ein la. One says she's pregnant without children, and the other says, pasuk says V'zera ein la. Why do we need both of those? So it says the Gemara, we needed both for the following reasons. If the pasuk had only said V'zera ein la, then I might have thought the fact that she's childless, I might have thought that that when we're talking about a woman who has children, that the reason we're saying that they need to still do yibum is because she first had no children, and then now she has two bodies, she and her child. But a woman who's pregnant, while she's pregnant, she has one body. When she's pregnant, everyone's still considered to be one body. So therefore, I might have thought she would be eligible for eating truma because she's only one body and not two. Not kamashmalan, therefore, we need the other part of the pasuk, the case of meuberes, to make sure that we exclude her from access to truma. However, says the Gemara, because of Rachmana meuberes, if the Torah had only taught us about the drush of kinureha to exclude a meuberes from truma, it might have made another error. Because of Rachmana meuberes, the meikara gufa srika, the hashta gufa malya. Before she was pregnant, her body was srika, was empty. Now that she's pregnant, her body is full. However, aval zera ein lo, when a woman doesn't have children, to meikara gufa srika, the hashta gufa srika, that even if she did have children, her uterus is still empty. Ema lo, I might have thought the din was different. Therefore, tzricha, we need both cases. The Gemara here presents a lengthy siman. It's 4 lines, 3 lines are all long. Siman amar le lo naaseh maaseha b'misa naaseh v'lo naaseh b'vlad yavam u'truma yibum u'truma siman. Okay, so you'll see as the Gemara continues as to how these simanim may be connected. The Gemara says on Pei Zayin Amud Beis, 5 lines down, Amar le Rabbi Yehuda midi iskarta l'Rava. Rabbi Yehuda midi iskarta asks a kasha to Rava. Maybe we should say lo naaseh mesim kichayim le'inyan yibum. Maybe we should say that we don't treat the descendants who died the same way as we do the ones that are alive in regards to yibum. That maybe the descendants who died won't cause for yibum. Says the Gemara, why would I have thought that? Mikal v'chomer. Uma b'makom she'asa vlad min harishon kivlad min hasheni leposa min truma lo asa mesim kechayim. That in a scenario of truma where we looked at the Vlad Rishon of, let's say, in the first part of our Mishnah, where the Bas Yisrael married a Kohen, and then she had a child, and then she went over to the second husband, there's Vlad Sheni, and we do say that that can create a psul from Truma. There, in regards to Truma lo asa mesim kechayim, we don't treat the death of descendants the same way as we do descendants who are alive. Then makom shelo asa Vlad min Rishon kivlad min hasheni lepotra min hayibum. By yibum, we don't say such a thing. That was the Klein and the Stein family. We don't care about the child from the first family because they're not related. Eino din shelo nasa mesim kechayim. Maybe then we should have a different din. We should say that that mesim are not treated the same way as chayim, and maybe if the child died at a later point, the yibum would again kick in. Says the Gemara, Talmud lomar deracheh darcheno mechol nesivos shalom. That's not right. Could you imagine a woman has a child with Reuven, and Reuven has a brother, and then the child dies 5 years later? So now Yibum kicks in. That's not possible because the Torah is derached darcheno mechol nesivos shalom. That's not the right way. The Torah feels that that's a violation of derached darcheno, and therefore we don't make such an assumption. The second drasha within this siman is about 12 lines down, 15 lines down, and the Gemara says maybe we should say v'naseh mesim kechayim l'inyan truma. Maybe we should say that the death of a descendant is the same as a living descendant as it relates to truma. How so? Mikal v'chomer. Uma b'makom shelo asa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni lepocher min yibum asa mesim kechayim. In regards to yibum, we don't say that child number one born to Chaim, to the first family, has any impact on the second to exempt her from yibum. And in such a case, asa mesim kechayim, the death of the child is similar to the living child. Then makom she'asa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni leposa min truma eino din shenasa mesim l'chaim. That in regards to truma, where we do say that there's an impact of her first child from the first marriage on the status of her ability to eat truma, maybe for sure we should say that mesim are kechayim. Says the Gemara, no, Talmud lomar v'zera ein la, that she does not have any children, and in fact she doesn't have children. Okay, and then the third kal v'chomer that the Gemara is going to try to make is as follows. Maybe we should say 3 lines into the wide lines. V'naseh vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni le'inyan yibum. Maybe we should say that the first child should have an impact on the yibum status of the second child. Says the Gemara, why would I have assumed that mikal v'chomer? Uma b'makom shelo asa mesim kechayim l'inyan truma asa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni. That in regards to truma, where we don't treat the death of a descendant as a living descendant in regards to truma, and there we have the guideline that the vlad min harishon does impact the status of her truma with the second child. Then makom she'asa mesim kechayim le'inyan yibum, that in regards to yibum, where we do treat the death of a descendant as we do a living descendant, then maybe we should say eino din shenase vlad min harishon ki vlad min hasheni. All the more so, we would say that the status of one child should impact another. Talmud lomar, no, that's not correct. Uven ein lo v'ha ein lo, and therefore we reject the havamina of this of the Gemara. And the last one before the end of the perek is the following assumption. Maybe we should say 5 lines before the end of the perek that v'lo naseh vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni l'truma. Maybe we should say that we don't treat the child of the first marriage like the second one for truma, that we disconnect the two, even though that's not what our Mishnah says. We're going to reject this anyways. But what was the kal v'chomer to make such an assertion? Ma b'makom she'asa mesim kechayim lepotra min hayibum lo asa vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni. That in regards to the case of treating the death of a descendant like a living one to exempt a woman from yibum, in such a case we don't connect the vlad min harishon and the vlad min hasheni. So then makom shelo asa mesim kechayim, that in regards to a halachic area where we don't treat mesim kechayim in truma, then all the more so eino din shelo nasa vlad min harishon ke vlad min hasheni. All the more so we should say that there's no impact from one child to the next in regards to truma. Says the Gemara, Talmud lomar ein lo v'ha yeshlan. In this case, she does have a child, so therefore there is a connection between the child born in one marriage and another as it relates to her access to truma. I know that these are some very complex kal v'chomers. Feel free to do some chazara. It took me a long time to understand them the first time. I'm not totally sure I understand all of them now as well as I should, but I got the basic concept. And with that, I'm going to say my happy words of Hadron Alach Yesh Mutaros. Baruch Hashem, we finished yet another perek, and we're starting another one right now. We're going to go until about 8 lines from the bottom of the page. We should come back to this perek in 7.5 years. The new perek opens. Ha'isha shahalach ba'ila l'medina sayah. A woman lives wherever she lives. Her husband goes out of town. Uba'u ve'amru la meis ba'alech. And she finds out that Nebuch, her husband's out of town. She finds out that her husband dies. And based on the testimony that she got, we'll see later that she only did this based on the testimony of one person. So then what's the din? If she married another, she was married to Ruvain died. Then she married Chaim, V'nises, ve'achar kach ba baila, and then her husband shows up after many months. And the halacha is, teitze mizel mizeh, she has to divorce both. V'tzricha get mizel mizeh, and she needs a get from both husbands. Ve'ein la ksuba, she doesn't collect her ksuba. V'lo peiros v'lo mazonos v'lo below, she doesn't collect the fruits. She doesn't have any chiyuv from her husbands, have no obligation to feed her. V'lo below, she doesn't get to collect the clothes that she had brought into the marriage. Lo al zev, lo al zeh, not on either husband, the first or second. But even not lamizel mizeh, if she took anything from them, taxer, she's obligated to pay back anything she took from them. The havlad mamzer mizel mizeh, and any children that were born subsequent to her marrying the second husband are considered mamzerim. For lo zev zeh metameh, neither husband, if they were kohanim, could become tameh to her if she died. They're totally disconnected from her. They have no rights to objects that are found in her name, any proceeds that she might have made, and they cannot be made for her nadarim. They cannot nullify her vows. And if Haisa Bas Yisrael, if in fact she was a Bas Yisrael, Nifsala Mina Kahuna, if she slept with the second husband, she's no longer allowed to marry a Kohen. She's a Zona, Ubas Levi Mina Meiser. If she's a Bas Levi, she can no longer eat Meiser, Bas Kohen Mina Truma. Very, very sharp. Ve'ein Yorshin Shel Zeh, Yorshin Shel Zeh, Yorshin is Ksubasa. There is no Ksuba money to be collected. Ve'im Mesu, if either of the husbands died, the original one or the second, Echav Shel Zeh, Ve'echav Shel Zeh Cholzin V'lo Miyavne. Rashi points out, why are we being so strict? She had edus. She had someone come over and say the husband's dead, and she married based on that edus. So Rashi points out the top Rashi in the Perek was because, not the top Rashi, the second Rashi, because she didn't do enough work. And she is basically a Zona. She needed to do more verification. You can't get married off of one testimony of one person. You have to do more work. You have to verify that the husband's actually dead. Sounds like you're trying to run. He's dead? Okay, wonderful. I read Mekudesh say, let's get married. So that's not allowed. And we'll see soon that this has some impact on the halachos of aguna, because Rashi speaks about this. This is really a subtext of what's going on in this Mishnah, is that we do try to rely on, we try to be mekel when it comes to aguna, but we have to be very careful, because when there is an aguna scenario where we think a husband has died, you have to be super careful when the woman remarries, because otherwise you have some serious halachic issues. And here, she did not go the extra mile to actually verify the death. 2/3 of the way down, halfway through the Mishnah and the new Perek, Rabbi Yossi Omer Ksuvasa al Nichse Bailo Harishon. It's not really right. He disagrees with the Tana Kama that really this woman does get the ksuba from the first husband. Rabbi Lazar Omer Harishon Zakai ben Mitziasav Ma'asedeva First Ladira. He argues with the Tana Kama and says that the first husband does have rights to any objects that have her name on them, any proceeds that she makes, and he is allowed to be made for her nadarim. And Reb Shimon Omer Biyaso Chalitzasa Me'echav Shal Rishon Poteres Sarasa. That Reb Shimon says that if there was any bia or chalitza, if there was any yibum or chalitza with any of the brothers, it patters the tzara from anything else. She can go free. Ve'ein havlad mamzer, ve'ein havlad mimenu mamzer, and he also argues with the Tana Kama. The Tana Kama held that in such a case where she remarries with only one aid, the child would be a mamzer. That this shita Rabbi Shimon doesn't agree. Ve'im nises shelo birshus. If she got married without rishus, we'll see soon what that means. Muteres lachzor lo. Then she's allowed to go back to the first husband. Nise salpi bezdin, if she got married with the das of bezdin, then teitze, and then the husband shows up, she should leave the marriage. Uptura mina korban, no korban is required. Lo nise salpi bezdin, if she married without bezdin, then teitze v'chayavin b'korban. Then she has to get divorced, but she's obligated to bring a korban. The Gemara points out a sidebar comment, which is yafek koach bezdin shepotra mina korban, is that when she marries properly through bezdin, then they are such a powerful institution, the institution of bezdin, that it exempts her from bringing a korban if she incorrectly marries. Horuha bezdin linase. Let's say they gave her a psak that she could marry halcha v'kilkala, and she went and she was inappropriate. She had tash b'shamita with someone. Then chayeves b'korban shelo yitzurel linase. That she's chayev in a korban because they only gave her permission to marry. It's not carte blanche to do whatever you want. And then she's chayev a korban. We'll be discussing a lot of this. So let's just learn. You know what? Actually, let's just stop here because it'll actually be much cleaner to start from here on Shabbos. We're going to stop at the end of this Mishnah on Shabbos Emir Tzashem, 45 minutes before Mincha. I think it's at 7:07. I think so. We'll be starting with from the Gemara on the bottom of Pei Zayin and Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.